Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holowchak, Ukrainian scholar and historian, American scholar as well. I'd like to introduce you to an episode of Eye on Ukraine. And today I want to talk about the excitement over the Ukrainians, specifically Vladimir Zelensky, signing an agreement with the United States to have a ceasefire, at least a 30-day ceasefire to the war. That has caused a lot of international fervor, excitement, especially to think that there might be an end to the war. I want to caution against all that sort of excitement. I'm excited by it because it marks, in my estimation, a certain shift, perhaps, in American and Ukrainian relationships. As everybody notes, with Zelensky agreeing to a peace settlement, a 30-day truce to end the war, to stop the war, at least for the time being. It paints Putin himself, it puts him in the corner. He has to make a decision in terms of whether or not he accepts this talks for an eventual end of the war, or whether he continues warring against Ukraine. Of course, we all know he started the war, and I just finished to draft my book on Putin's obsession with Ukraine. I talk about the causes of the war, and I talk about what I call Putin's muscular militarism. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go on today. But I don't want to diminish excitement about what has been happening here. I only want to exercise caution because Putin has no desire himself to end the war. And why do I say that? I've said this before. Russia has been converted since the start of the war with Ukraine to a military economy. Roughly 40% of everything that it does economically is geared towards assisting its military, towards a military output. And it's not easy to stop. And it's done that at the expense of the Russian people, of the well-being of the Russian people. So we have the Russian people suffering greatly in terms of their quality of life, as if they've ever had a quality of life. They've never had a quality of life. So I want to exercise a great deal of caution over getting overly excited. Come on, Jeff. Putin does not want to end the war because he can't end the war. Let's put it simply. Why can't he end the war? The Russian economy is in such a horrific state, right? Inflation, as I said before, is as high as 30%, perhaps even higher than that right now. The people can't afford to buy food. They can't afford to pay rent. And, the economy is in shambles. The army is in shambles. There are people, they're using donkeys and bicycles in their war effort. There are people on crutches who are sent to the front line. If they refuse to go, they're put to death, or there's a threat of being put to death. And they don't have enough soldiers. The army is still large and in some measure formidable, but they have missiles that they're striking at Ukrainian cities and so forth. But they're in a very dire militaristic situation, and they do need a cessation of the war efforts at some point to at least catch their breath, to pause, for Putin to pause and just see, where am I? What can I do? How can I revivify? How can I February situation so I can, intensify the war effort and capture? His goal is to capture all of Ukraine. Now, I suspect we can learn much about his war efforts in Georgia in 2008. August 1, he starts a war with Georgia. He says the war, right, is on behalf of, he's been backing separatists in South Ossetia, in Abkhazia. And Putin, notice how he does that in the Donbass area. He has the separatists that he backs there, and he claims that he's preventing the genocide in the Donbass of Russophobes, people who speak Russian. Of course, none of that is true, because Ukrainians just about all over Ukraine speak Russia. And if he wants to liberate all the Russophones, he'd have to liberate all of Ukraine. Presumably, that's what he wants to do anyway. So we have this war going on. It's a short-lived war. It's probably best called an invasion in Georgia, and it begins. There's trouble there for decades already. Ever since Georgia declared its independence on April 1991, they've been having trouble with Georgia, and so Putin declares that his intervention in Georgia is to prevent genocide, right, of the Southern Ossetians and the Abkhazians. And none of this is true, right? What happened in 2003, Georgia had a pro-West turn, which infuriated Putin. And the idea was to go in there and cause mass destruction. Georgia also was hoping on a path to become part of NATO. Putin would have none of that. Right? Again, we see similarities with the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Lest Ukraine become part of NATO, right? Putin's always obsessed with there's this problem with NATO encirclement, NATO's encirclement on Russia. The problem that he fails to grasp is that the growth of the NATO nations, especially since 1991, when the USSR failed to become the USSR, has been on account of fear by these former Russian republics of Russia, of the Soviet republics of Russia, coming after them, attacking them, assailing them again. That's exactly what we have here in 2008. We have Putin's involvement in Georgia. Now, the funny thing is, on August 10, the war starts on August 1. On August 10, there is a ceasefire, which is signed by Russia. And the war effort is supposed to end on August 12th, right? That's when the surcease of all fighting is supposed to happen. Putin signs this, disregards it completely, and continues fighting and bombing and obliterating all Georgia until Georgia formally surrenders on August 16th, right? This was supposed to be a sort of blueprint for what happened with what Putin expected to do with Crimea, and he was successful with Crimea, right? And what he was doing with activists, quote unquote, Russian-backed activists, separatists in the Donbass, in Luhansk and Donetsk. And, he was fairly successful in that area. And of course, he continues today. This was the beginning of the war in 2014, which has, in many respects, the 2022 invasion is just a continuancy of that effort on a large scale. Now, I'm going to read a passage to you by Svante Kornell, Johanna Janevsky, and Nicholas Nielsen, who wrote a booklet, a short booklet or paper, if you want to call it, titled Russia's War with Georgia, Causes and Implications for Georgia and the World. It was studied in 2008. They made a study of Putin's involvement, and their conclusion was, in many respects, that this was not in the least any effort to prevent genocide, right? What was going on here was an invasion for the sake of taking over Georgia and annexing it, bringing it back into Russia instead of the Soviet Union, Russia. And Svante Kornell et al., right? This invasion took the world by surprise, but what should have been surprising about it was perhaps the extent of Russia's willingness to employ crude military force against a neighboring state. Not that it happened. Indeed, Russia had for several years pursued increasingly aggressive and interventionist policies in Georgia, and it had employed an array of instruments that included military means, albeit at a smaller scale. In the several months that preceded the invasion, Moscow's increasingly blatant provocations against Georgia led to a growing fear in the analytic community that it was seeking a military confrontation. Yet Western reactions to this aggressive behavior remained declaratory and cautious in nature, and they failed to attach costs to Russia for its behavior. So in other words, what they say is the West should have seen this coming, right? Because it was obvious to all uh, that Putin wanted to take Georgia. It was in the cards, as it were. The rest, the West declared astonishment when it happens. And how did this happen? Did it happen? And of course, they did nothing you coming up. No, just relax, Step. They did nothing to change the situation. That's the same response that the West had in Crimea, in the Donbass in 2014. They slap on the wrist. You did something bad, but we're not going to do anything about it. So Putin, you can do for the most part whatever you want. And so Putin has been testing the waters for decades since his presidency to see how the West responds. He claims this is just merely an instance of NATO encirclement, of NATO imposing its systems of immorality and lack of values on trying to do this to Russia, trying to take over Russia. The opposite with Putin is always the case, right? He's trying to do the opposite with that. So we see, we learn from this episode, if we look back to history, something the Trump administration and his lackeys, his minions, refused to do, that Putin uses the same strategy over and over and over. He claims that he's preventing genocide. He's intervening in Georgia only to prevent genocide. Doesn't care about genocide, doesn't care about the loss of lives one way or the other. What's on his mind is taking over piece by piece the former satellite republics that were part of the USSR, controlled with an iron fist by Moscow over the decades. That's been on Putin. So what I'm saying here is that there's zero prospect for peace. Putin isn't interested. Here again, he signs this deal on August 10, 2008, completely neglects what he signs. The Russian war machine keeps advancing. He uses the opportunity of this presumed ceasefire to have his way with Georgians, and he takes and annexes Georgia by August 16. So he's going to do the same with any ceasefire that we have here on behalf of Ukraine. Now, what is Zelensky doing? Doesn't he know this? Of course he knows that. It's a very smart gambit, as it were, on Zelensky's part to curry favor with the mercurial president Donald Trump, whose decisions regarding Ukraine and the war changed apropos of which side of the bed he wakes on, how he feels, and so forth. This is a person who is guided not by intelligence, but sort of by viscerality, by his feelings on a particular day. We know that he doesn't like Zelensky, and he never will like Zelensky because of 2019. He tried to interfere in the presidential election by getting some dirt on Joe Biden, presumably through his son Hunter Biden. Zelensky didn't play ball, and that just pissed Putin off. Pissed Trump off, and he just doesn't like Zelensky. He never will like Zelensky. He doesn't like the fact that Zelensky put up a fight in the Oval Office over a week ago. February 28th, over 2 weeks ago, some 2 weeks ago, and so forth. Zelensky is a strong-willed person, but he's got to play the political game because he's worried about the lives of Ukrainian people, and correctly so. He needs to be answerable as a true Democrat, a true patriot, and a true leader of a democratic country, which Trump is not. He considers the lives and the interests of the Ukrainian people first and foremost. It's not the case with Donald Trump, who's more concerned about his own well-being, right? Buying automobiles for Elon Musk because his company is going down, his stock is going down, and his car company, whatever the hell that's called. Zelensky is being shrewd here. He knows nothing's going to come of a ceasefire. He knows that Putin's going to use this time as an opportunity to reboot terminology and to come at Ukraine again when he can rebolster, revivify his military, sit down and think about what the next move is, right? And one option, of course, is if he can come to the table and say, look, we want all the Kursk regions, we want the four oblasts as well as the Crimea, and we're not going to flinch on that in the least. You give us all the territory we want, in which case, if that is done, if Trump forces Zelensky to acquiesce, and I don't think Zelensky ever will just move his forces into those areas and wait for a suitable meet moment to take the rest of Ukraine. Then comes Belarus, then perhaps Poland and Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, right? Something has to be done immediately by Europe, hopefully with the aid of the United States or by Europe and Ukraine alone to stop this madman from advancing. He can't stop, and I end with this thought. He cannot stop. It's just not going to happen because the Russian economy is in such a pathetically bad state. Were the war to end, he'd have to face the people and explain, why did I allow the economy to fall into such state of disrepair, dysfunctionality that all the people are suffering immeasurably? And that case, he would be removed from office, probably by the oligarchs, if not by a popular uprising, and he would be liquidated. What the Soviets used to call the wet work, the bloody work, right? He would be killed. Putin knows that. This is why he today has donned his military garb and is presumably going to visit the Kursk region to incite his soldiers on and try to convince the rest of the world that we have attained some great military victory. And so he's going to try to use that to his advantage when he goes to the negotiation table. When he does, to try to salvage, to try to save his neck. His life is on the line. All right, I end with that. So Zelensky knows that there's no possibility of a lasting peace here. The end of the war will come when one group, when the Russia itself or Ukraine and its allies defeats Russia, or when Russia just takes Ukraine. If it can divide Europe, NATO, if it can separate from Ukraine, U.S. involvement, and so forth. So the war will not end, right, with any ceasefire, and a ceasefire, even if there is one to be had, will not lead to any agreement to cessation of the war. Putin can't have it. He will be removed from power. I have to leave here because my dog is jumping up and down, letting me know that it is time for him to do his duty, as we all have duties to do to our country and so forth. Slava Ukraini, and we'll do this again very, very soon. Thank you. And please, if you like this, share it and like. And I'll have another one for you in a week or so. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.